During the turn of the millennium, we saw all kinds of kids programming blocks changing their lineup with these sleek, new licensed shows. Anime. I mean, why produce your own show when you can buy Moncali Nights for $10? Toward the end of this craze, Disney, of all people, decided to get into the mix by buying the Fox Kids programming block. An early appetizer for the whole company, I guess. Rebranded as Jetix on ABC Family and later Toon Disney, Disney had a whole series of licenses left over. However, on the tail of the anime trend came a parallel trend of creating new anime-inspired shows. To follow this trend of the other trend, Disney looked toward their printed media for adaptation inspiration, with an animated series based on their Italian-published comic book series, W.I.T.C.H, which whoever came up with that title has no concern for search engine optimization. Despite the title, the main characters of which are not witches, but human guardians with the power to transform into fairy-like heroes. The title witch is an acronym for the characters' names: Will, Irma, Tarani, Cornelia, and Hey Lin, who discover they have inherited powers based on the classical elements. They're tasked with protecting the parallel fantasy world, the Meridian, and maintaining interdimensional portals between it and Earth, all while dealing with middle school level struggles. Except they have friends, so it's not totally accurate to middle school. I never heard of Witch while it was airing. I didn't really watch Jetix much in general. It wasn't until I posted my video review for the Winx Club that I eventually heard about it through the comments. I think it's worth noting that even though the first issue of Witch was published before the first episode of Winx, the first episode of Winx did air before the TV adaptation of Witch. So although it's unfortunate, it is inevitable that these two things will be compared. While I eventually enjoyed Witch and got invested in its characters, it takes way too long on selling the show to the audience. So let's rediscover Disney's attempt to break into the world of knockoff anime. Before we continue, today's video is sponsored by Verve. Head out to vrv.co/Billiam to get a 30-day free trial of Verve Premium. I think Verve has to be one of the best valued streaming platforms out there. With channels such as Nick Splat, Cartoon Network's Boomerang, and Crunchyroll, there's a lot to see and a lot to discover. Part of what makes Verve so great is its convenience factor. Being available on a wide variety of streaming platforms, it's really easy to stop watching a show in one location and start it again at any place and any time. And part of what makes this so great is the fact that you can sync episodes offline so you can watch them while you're not connected to the internet. I recently had to fly out to California, but fortunately I was entertained on my flight because I loaded a bunch of episodes of Demon Slayer Kimetsu no Yaiba to my tablet. It made the flight really easy, and part of that is because Demon Slayer is just an incredible show. The characters are great, the world is great, but what sets Demon Slayer apart and puts it ahead at just a different level are the action sequences. It's able to blend 2D characters and 3D set pieces and sometimes 3D bodies, I think, in order to create these stunning, incredible action sequences. Like, I keep saying it because of how amazing it was. So check it out, it's totally worth the hype, and go to vrv.co/Billiam to get a 30-day free trial of Verve Premium. And thank you again to Verve for sponsoring this video. While published by Disney Italia, Witch was created by Elisabetta Known, Alessandro Barbucci, and Barbara Canepa. Please correct me in the comments. While the creative input of the creators was undoubtedly important, Disney threw in some of their marketing expertise to try to get the book to appeal to the widest audience possible. It took on a magical girl style, of course was influenced by anime, and in order to sell to preteens, the characters would be middle schoolers, but more of the issues they deal with and freedom they're granted is more in line with older teenagers. Part of the comic was published in a magazine initially in order to get around the perception of comics being for boys. The only thing that's for anyone is that opinion, and it is for babies, but these comics were eventually released in collected volumes, and even as standard text novelization adaptations, which were apparently pretty popular. And finally, with Disney co-producing alongside France's public broadcasting service, a 2-season, 52-episode adaptation would be produced, with the first episode airing on December 18th, 2004. So anyways, I think it's no surprise that I was watching this through illegal rips on YouTube. Disney, please don't sue me. I would not like that at all. I would cry. But anyways, I just keep fixating on the Toon Disney logo because I can't stop seeing this, like, incredibly surprised and tired Mickey Mouse face. I just had to share that. While many of the major plot points repeat from the comic to the show, there were a lot of changes made between the two. They do a lot of streamlining to make it work for a more episodic narrative rather than a serialized narrative. As soon as the show starts, they want to get into the action, but unfortunately what this means is the audience has to play catch up in order to get to know the characters. The story begins in the Meridian with the capture and escape of rebel leader Caleb. Caleb leads a rebellion against the evil sorcerer Phobos, who rules over the Meridian. He wants to get more powerful, but doesn't want to hit up the magic gym, so he's looking for the rightful heir to the throne to steal her powers. Meanwhile, the main cast begins discovering they have all of these magic powers, and Haylin's grandmother tells Will, Irma, Tarani, Cornelia, and Haylin that they all have inherited elemental powers and have been chosen to succeed her as the next Guardians of the Veil. Protectors meant to maintain peace in the Meridian and manage interdimensional portals between it and Earth. Meanwhile, Caleb comes to Earth and meets up with the Guardians, but he has to learn some Earth-level street smarts. He learns all about skateboarding, snowboarding, which is just like mudboarding, and comments on all the weird slang Earth has. Like how people say like a lot. What an astute observation, Caleb. People do say like a lot. Episodes might have a stinger at the end, slowly moving the plot forward, but episode to episode, the series relies on a formula. The girls have some middle school thing going on, and that gets interrupted by a portal opening and the squad having to get together to fight whatever monster comes out of it. While Phobos is the big bad waiting for his end of the season fight, he has minions constantly going after the girls for one reason or another. There's a lot of MacGuffins in this show, from the stone that gives the Guardians their powers, the Heart of Kandrakar, which sounds like it belongs in a fantasy parody, to the Book of Secrets, a ledger that has all of Phobos' thoughts and motivations. Heading these side missions is Phobos' right-hand snake man, Lord Cedric, a giant snake guy who can disguise himself as a person and also leads the troops in the war. He's awesome looking. I think a huge highlight to the series are the creature designs. They're so creepy, hideous, but very memorable. They all have unique powers. It's a great contrast to the more bright and colorful Guardians. But while the designs are interesting, the animation quality leaves a lot to be desired. I mean, look at these transformation sequences. The movement is really nice and elegant, but the final poses just end up looking like they belong on a character model sheet. They're flat, they're not dynamic, and they're awkward. I wouldn't care, but obviously they're in every single episode. Like, dang, have some energy. But once the plot gets going, the show becomes a lot more interesting, even the more episodic episodes, because by then I'm invested in the characters a little bit more. Will is your typical average protagonist, Irma is always joking, Tarani is a bit shy and timid, Cornelia is very opinionated and stubborn, and Haylin is a big fucking dork. Essentially, it's the standard these kids wouldn't be friends in real life group. It took me a while to want to watch the next episode. With large ensemble shows like this, you want to start by following a singular character and later expanding on the rest of the cast. Following a single character makes it easier to get invested because you're being introduced to all of these new things from their perspective. Instead, we meet all 5 characters at once alongside Caleb and the rebellion and alongside Haylin's grandmother. Immediately, they're finding out about this new amazing world, so that's another thing to balance being introduced in just one episode.
Recap? We've got to protect the world from evil by repairing holes in some kind of veil.
This doesn't involve sewing, does it?
I'm sitting here watching Witch and folding laundry, and I just love when they're introduced to their powers and how unimpressed they are by it. They're like, oh, that's okay, I guess.
Man, I hate heights.
Oh my god, they just learned they can fly! And the girl's reaction is like, oh man, I'm afraid of heights! It's like their whole understanding of the world just completely changed. Magic is real, but they're just so totally unimpressed by it. I love it! I'm sorry for yelling. I'm sorry. We never get a status quo from them. We don't really know how their lives are changing as they get introduced to this amazing world. And this exact issue is repeated later in the series with Elion. who we learn is Phobos' sister. So Elion is probably the most important plot character for season 1. She's a friend of the squad's, and Phobos wants to steal her power. At first, the show was a race to identify the sister and make sure Phobos doesn't get access to her. While Elion is introduced in the first issue of the comic, she's not a guardian, so her relationship to the other girls becomes strained as they go off on all of these adventures and leave her behind, which makes it easy for Phobos to manipulate her. But in the show, she's introduced in episode 4, the same episode where Phobos explains his goal to find his sister. From there, she's just kind of in the background until the episode before she becomes important again. They bring her in just to remind you she exists. Then immediately after, she finds out about everyone's powers. We learn about her and Cornelia's lifelong friendship, and now she's on Phobos' side and won't talk to the others, accepting this new world and Phobos' words at face value. We don't get to know her status quo either. She's already distanced when we meet her. The show is not interested in how the characters react to these newfound amazing worlds and powers, which makes the initial setup incredibly uninteresting. We know Elion feels betrayed because she tells us, but not because we see it happening like in the books. However, after Elion joins Phobos, the show is much more interesting. Even the episodic episodes are more interesting because the monster of the week monsters are now obstacles to their end goal, even if the episodes don't move the plot along necessarily. Binging the show also reveals this huge tonal whiplash between episodes. The dedication to the formula is shocking. It's like they find out their friend's life is in danger at the end of one episode, and then the next episode they're at a fucking bowling alley. It makes it really hard to get invested in the drama when the characters themselves don't even seem to be invested, which also refuses to explore and expand upon its world. I mean, we see Phobos' castle a lot, so that's my perception of the Meridian. But everywhere else is just set pieces for the episode. Like there's this episode where there's a prison rescue from this place called the Mines. It's underwater. That's what we know about it. What purpose does it serve? What are they mining? I mean, things don't always need a greater purpose or explanation. You can have fun set pieces for the sake of being fun, but they gloss over these kinds of details consistently and constantly. It makes the world feel shallow. Locations contribute to world building about as much as any random level in Super Mario Bros. Contributes to that world. And as much as I like the creatures, they're not telling me how this world operates any more than this guy tells me about how the Mushroom Kingdom operates. But I like it when they do give us things to expand upon the world, like these weird whispering plants that gossip. I'm intrigued. The Ancient One is an interesting and curious character. I just want more structure explanation. Ground it with something. By the end of season 1, I was interested in where season 2 was going to go, and so far I'm enjoying it. But the only reason I stuck with the show for so long was because I was creating a video about it. If I didn't have to watch the whole show, I wouldn't have. It takes way too long to get attached to these characters, and the tonal shifts episode to episode makes it hard to get invested in the drama. Wait, hold on a minute, I didn't mention Blunk? This is Blunk? However, once you are invested, it's pretty good. The characters are charming, the world when explored is interesting, and I want to see where it goes. It tries to start right out of the gate with getting to the exciting parts. However, what ends up happening is you have to play catch up with getting to know the characters. So while the action may be exciting, you're not invested yet. Fortunately, season 2 had a much clearer direction with the showrunner who made sure they were a little closer to the tone and story of the comic. I mean, it could have been the same showrunner, I don't fucking know. That change in production style is evident in episode 1 of season 2. Less than 10 episodes in, it is so much better than the first season. The show was initially Disney's Disneyed version of Witch. Going back and reading the original comic, it's so much more appealing. The characters are way more expressive, and we actually get to see them adjusting to their new magical powers. It seems like the comic and the graphic novel is more concerned with allowing its story to unfold naturally rather than rushing to get to the exciting parts. While the show only lasted for 2 seasons, the comic actually continued for many years after, ending in 2012. And demand for this series must still exist because in 2017, Disney began to reprint all of the graphic novels, which are still being released to this day. With Disney Plus coming out, a lot of Witch fans are hoping that we'll actually get an official re-release of the series, or maybe even a continuation or reboot. However, there's apparently tension between Disney and the original creators. As the brand began to get more and more popular, Disney began to tighten their control over it, and the original vision the creators had for the ending was completely ignored. They've even distanced themselves from the Disney ending. So if there was some sort of reboot or continuation, it would probably be without the original creators. The Witch show adaptation is actually very charming and interesting. However, it just gets too excited about itself at the beginning and tries to skip over necessary character establishment, which makes it hard to get into the show initially. It seems like the first season of Witch, the second season is way much better about this, was more interested in being a commercial for the brand rather than wanting to tell a story. Which unfortunately means I was initially bored watching it, but I did eventually turn around and see the show for what it was. Pretty good. So anyways, thank you for watching this video. If this is your first video of mine, consider subscribing, liking, commenting, doing all that stuff that YouTubers ask you to do. Other than that, have a good day, and I will see you next week.